Welcome to Talkin Science, where we dive into the stories making headlines in the world of science and space. I'm Matt Miller. Dr. Brad Tucker is here. Brad, happy Tuesday.
How's it going?
Doing really well, my friend. Let's get the headlines in this, the 48th week of 2021. Aussie astronauts are about to become a thing. Earth observing gets a boost with a 10-year plan from our space agency. And on the lookout for bushfires, how a new mission could aid authorities and residents of remote areas.
This is Trekzone's Talkin Science.
Well, don't forget, Trekzone membership available via the join button under each video on YouTube or via the trek.zone/support. Plus, Trekzone's on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and your favourite podcast feed. Find us, like, follow, and subscribe. Brad, too, on social media, at btucker22 on Twitter, and Dr. Brad Tucker on Facebook. Brad, I can't believe there's now less than a month until Christmas. Just where the hell has the time gone?
Yeah, it's pretty wild to figure out, to realize how fast things are going, but lots of things always happening to keep you occupied and your mind off of it.
Absolutely, they do. Well, just incredible that the last year has flown by. Coming up to round out our 350 podcasts of the year will be a special live edition of Talkin Science with highlights from the year that was, so look out for that in the next few weeks. For now, on with the show. First up in our headlines, NASA's looking ahead to their new mission where it's not that story, we will sort that out, but NASA are looking ahead to their new mission where laser communications will be tested, hopefully replacing good old-fashioned radio waves, Brad.
Yeah, it's kind of an exciting thing to think about because this has been one of the big efforts of the Artemis mission getting back to the moon, and that is high bandwidth transmissions of data. And it's not that radio waves are bad, they will always be used and necessary, but if there are ways of getting much higher download rates and data transfers, that's what's going to be needed for the next generation of moon missions and beyond. And so this is something that NASA has been really working on with partners, including here in Australia, and specifically where I work at Mount Stromlo, to get this up and running, because there's a lot of hope of how it can transform space travel by being able to transform how we send data.
Well, I'm excited for this, Brad. Saber Astronautics, based here in Australia and in the US, have teamed up with Axiom Space to facilitate actual Australian astronauts. Now, it would be remiss of me to not mention Dr. Andy Thomas, but he had to become an American citizen and join NASA's astronaut corps to get into space. Not so for future Aussies.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Andy Thomas and Paul Scully-Power, who have been the only two Australian astronauts, both had to have American citizenship. This is trying to find a way of, can we get Australians in space through the modern way, and that is private companies. Axiom Space is set to have their first launch in a couple of months, having astronauts. So instead of essentially just being as part of a country, you could be as part of a company or even being contracted through. So there's a lot of exciting promise this way.
Well, this is the next step for Saber, who own and run the Responsive Space Operations Centre in Adelaide, our version of mission control. A spokesperson there saying that supporting astronauts is a long-term goal of the centre and it's going to be accelerated by agreement with Axiom. Brad, where will these astronauts be able to go in space?
Well, nominally, Axiom Space has 4 missions in the works planned between SpaceX and NASA to be hosted on the space station. That's the goal. And that's actually the really key part of this agreement, is not even just people, but experiments and such. Essentially, easy access to the International Space Station for hopefully people, but also experiments. And usually you have to go through somewhere, and lots of companies own their own platforms. Boeing owns one, Airbus owns one, and the like. But to be able to both send equipment potentially and people is the exciting thing through one partnership. And all of this activity is residing, at least for the next few years, in the space station. But Axiom Space, further down the track in the next few years, wants to build their own space station, potentially attached to the International Space Station, and then goes off on their own. So lots of exciting potential there.
Well, with Axiom, as you mentioned, their first flight will see 3 private US and Israeli customers fly to the space station and perform 25 experiments over a 1-week stay in February next year. They truly believe in their product if they're already taking orders for future trainees, I guess, Brad.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think this is kind of that cool thing because Axiom Space was founded by old NASA astronauts, even one of the former administrators, heads of NASA, formed Axiom Space. So it's a bunch of people who know what they're doing. They know how the system works. They know, genuine costs. That's always one of the slight downsides to a lot of private companies who have lots of exciting ideas, maybe don't appreciate all of the hard yards and difficulty it can be and how slow sometimes stuff can be to get it right, especially for human spaceflight. These are coming from people who have done it and ran it and have been in it. So when they say they can deliver and this is what they need to do, they kind of already know what needs to happen. If they say they're going to do it, they probably will. And as you said, they already are planning, they're already taking orders, and their first mission is already about to happen. And NASA and SpaceX are quite happy to partner with them. And it's really just a change in model on how space happens. And we've talked a lot about that, and this is a great chance for Australians to yet again find a way into it.
Well, next up, the Australian Space Agency's Earth Observation from Space roadmap has been released. It's the second in a series of 7 to be shared, and it outlines a 10-year plan to support growth of this priority area. First up, we've spoken before about it, but remind us, what is Earth observing, Brad?
Yeah, and it sounds like a weird thing, but this actually isn't about a science with the Earth per se. This is really application-driven observation. So we just simply mean observing the Earth, and that sounds simple, but it's not. There's lots of different ways we observe the Earth: weather, agriculture, defense, all those sorts of things. So, in fact, most of the ideas that people have about how we use satellites here on Earth are actually Earth observations. Yes, we have our satellites that we look down and out into space, but this is really all infrastructure to help us see on Earth better, seeing large spots, large swaths of the Earth, and lots of it at a time.
Well, we're a vast country, so one of the key Earth observing data points for us is bushfire conditions. We'll talk about a new mission to that end in a sec, but like recent catastrophic events have demonstrated, we need to be able to keep an eye on pretty much everything at all times, and a bird in orbit is the perfect fit for that, especially one we've built to our needs, launched and maintained. All about this sovereign space capability we keep talking about.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of the name of the game here, because there's so many that you have to use. And I think in the report, the Bureau of Meteorology says you kind of use 24 to 28 different satellites just for a day's weather forecast. And most of those are through other companies and countries. And that's, these are sorts of critical things where it goes into defense technologies, you said, and critical emergency situations. And it's an infrastructure problem. And I think this is what this plan is really trying to boldly put forward and spell out and say to other people: you wouldn't rely on another country to do this infrastructure for you on Earth. Why are we doing it in space if it's so critical? And that's the point. We have to not just develop it and build it ourselves, but maintain it, operate it, and then have a pipeline of projects to, replace the old ones and those sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, 5 focus areas have been identified: Australian Earth observing missions and payloads, data quality assurance and integrity monitoring, enhanced data management, international Earth observing partnerships and leadership, as well as access to international data and missions. That's a lot of words, a lot of titles, but when you boil it all down, the aim with all of it is to triple the size of our space sector by the end of the decade. Again, Brad, I'm reminded that the space sector isn't just people floating in a tin can high above the surface or even shooting off to the moon and Mars. There's a lot of data analysis that goes on for us mere mortals on the ground.
Yeah, look, in fact, that's actually the majority of what people do. It's not building the satellites or using the cameras. It's data analysis. And so that's a skill set that lots of people can get into. And there's a lot of astronomers who start in astronomy and go to Earth observations because If you know how to analyze things looking up, you know how to analyze things looking down. You need different technology, and we need the people to build that technology as well. And that's the key. Is it's also okay. Maybe we don't always build our own, but we need to make sure we're partnering with or have access to people as they build their unique thing. Because as satellites go around, they see large swaths of area, and there's just when we say in space there's so much data, there is so much data. So it's making sure that we're not underutilizing the stuff that's already there, missing things from stuff that we already see, and not duplicating efforts as well. That's the key part of it. It's not just we need a stamp on our own infrastructure to make sure that from what we need to what we get is all taken care of. And that is sometimes the satellites and sometimes the instruments, that sometimes just using and analyzing and interpreting the data.
Well, lastly this week, Brad, as climate change worsens, bushfires are likely to become more intense and frequent. We saw that last year before COVID, so now we must find new ways of managing bushfires to prevent catastrophic events. That's where OzFuel comes in. Tell us more.
Yeah, and OzFuel is one of these missions that is a key example of Earth observations. And that is, it's not just key to monitor where fires are spreading, but the work, and this is a project that's been led by Marta Yebra, is, well, if we can better understand the fuel loads, we can better predict where the fires are going to go. And if you can better predict where the fires are going to go, that's critical for resource management. It's critical for emergency response and emergency warning, planning, all those sorts of things. And as we saw in 2019, 2020 summer, those maps of saying where the predicted fire load was going to go were, critical to saving lives. And a lot of that data comes and can be improved by dedicated missions to measure what they call the fuel load.
Now, it's not just about detecting the fires after they've started, but before they become a threat. It's keeping up on those tinderbox conditions, the amount of fuel load on the ground. That can aid authorities in directing their prescribed burning efforts. And foreign satellites just don't cut the mustard when it comes to keeping an eye on our unique environment. One of the key things here in Australia is eucalyptus. It's so highly flammable. Some say that planes and drones are enough, but those large-scale operations are limited by range and the height that they're at, and they can take a lot longer than a satellite above taking a snapshot of the continent as a whole in just a few hours to about a day. So certainly differences in scale here, and satellites are certainly probably the best cost-benefit analysis.
And that's one of the keys, right? I mean, people in drones are finding a key way there, and you can see a lot of detail compared to a satellite, but you're only looking over a small area. And as you said, if you want to do long-term management and planning, a satellite is that you get that view. That's the key here. And as you said, with some of the other companies or satellites up there by other companies and countries, they're not tuned to the needs of Australia. They're also not tasked to look at Australia every day. Again, that's a key aspect. This is going back to this sovereign capability. Yes, we may get some things, but that is not their main purpose. If you make it the main purpose, you always get that data. You always get that monitoring. And okay, do you need daily monitoring in the winter? No. But if you're coming to November and December and January, probably very useful to have that daily and even sometimes half daily monitoring in some places to really update and measure what the changes are. As you said, with the eucalypts and the other native unique things of Australia. And also these missions, when I think sometimes when we picture these, we picture things like the Hubble Space Telescope, the James Webb Space Telescope that cost billions of dollars. We're actually talking about a few $1 million. We're actually not talking about a lot of money to do something like this. We're it's kind of chump change almost in the long run.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and as is always the case, authorities learn, at least I hope they do, from the mistakes of past catastrophic events, and a recent Royal Commission and a New South Wales parliamentary inquiry into the 2019-20 Black Summer bushfires highlight the significant lack of big picture detail fire crews back at headquarters had. We talked about this as Talkin Science rolled into 2020 season. We spoke with 10 News First weather expert Josh Holt as well about fuel loads and about bushfire conditions conditions, all this big picture detail, sovereign space capability. Well, it's another thing we've been talking about for the last couple of years. Definitely warranted, and here's a real world example of what can happen, what can be benefited from immediately.
And you also then can spin on the flip side, and there was good examples where a number of years ago when the U.S. went into the U.S. government shutdown. Well, when the U.S. government shuts down, they did it a few years ago, and it was in February at the end of our fire season. And still, February is still pretty precarious in terms of our fire season. It's not over. And they shut down all non-essential services and all overseas services. That means if we were reliant on data from U.S. government satellites, they were not going to do it because they were not scheduled, and they weren't going to do it because they were shut down. They were still operating for critical U.S. interests, but not overseas interests. And that is just this other small point where, yes, it's always good to work with other people, and usually it works, but, you only need a few things to go wrong at the right time, so to speak, and what turns into something from, minor to could be catastrophic. And this is that example of having your own capability in addition to other capabilities from other countries and support really can transform what we can do for, and as you said, when you do sometimes cost-benefit analysis, a few $1 million now for the potential savings of effort, time, lives, property damage, it goes on, is kind of easy to understand, right, what you're talking about. And that's where satellites are really transforming. They're not these big, long-term, takes 10 to 20-year, billion-dollar missions. You can turn them out for small, specific purposes in a very quick amount of time.
Well, just before we go, Brad, a look back on a Talkin Science interview from the year. He's in space now as part of the third expedition on the space station. He's stuck around for expeditions 64, 65 and 66. But back in April, before he launched, Colonel Mark Vande Hei beamed into Trekzone to give us a brief glimpse into life as an astronaut.
You obviously have a job to do and you have a wealth of training to support you, but how do you prepare for launching into orbit and spending such a long duration on the space station?
Oh, I think you just have to pay attention to your mental health. I think for me, spending some time meditating every day, trying to figure out ways to help out other people is a great way for me to feel happy with myself. So just having a sense of service about every day and trying to feel like you have a way to contribute to the rest of the group that's useful will go a long way towards making it a very enjoyable time period for me.
Well, that one is available via the card here on our YouTube video, or if you're podcasting us, jump onto Trekzone and click the link on our official watch page. Brad, it's great to pick apart the stories of the week with you. We'll do it all again next week.